Hi there, my name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I still bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I found is that there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Julie Kratz, she, her, founder of Next Pivot Point. This week, our conversation is about honoring disability justice with a new quarter, building groundbreaking housing for adults with autism, tackling Denmark's reading crisis, and more. Let's get started. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Bernadette.
And by the way, Julie is also author of We Want You, an allyship guide for people with power. So, congratulations on the new book before I forget. Great book, by the
Oh,
way.
thank you. And thanks for being a part of all the things, the research, the promotion, the endorsements, all the things. Thanks, Bernadette.
My pleasure. Can you tell folks a little bit about yourself and your work?
Yeah. So my pronouns are she, her. I've done inclusion and allyship work for going on over 10 years now. And it all started by just being a white woman, recognizing my own lack of belonging in corporate spaces. So I spent 12 years in corporate before I started my business. And it really was because I didn't feel that elusive sense of inclusion in the workplace. I didn't see people like me leading. I didn't feel like I was really wanted or valued fully. And so when I started my business, it was really to help others feel more included. And I quickly realized it just wasn't just about gender or even race. There's a whole variety of identity that comes into the conversation around diversity and inclusion. And I like to look at it through the lens of allyship. And the latest book is really written out of what I felt like was a need following this political administration, just a better understanding of folks in power and how to engage them. And they're really waiting for an invitation. And so the book is that invitation.
Love it. I love it. Well, it's just so much aligns with what I wrote about in this week's newsletter. I have my weekly 5 Things newsletter and a survey that I do every year. And one of the responses that I received in the survey last week was lots of folks were saying things like that people in their companies or organizations tell them we get this DEI thing already, and it was overblown to begin with. So I guess the first question is do you think DEI was overblown to begin with, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, I really loved what you had to say in this week's newsletter. I always anxiously await that in my inbox every Saturday morning. So thanks for speaking truth and giving us those good vibes. Overblown. You know, I'd love to know what part that people feel is overblown. When we look at what we've really accomplished, representation numbers haven't changed very much. You could argue they've gotten significantly worse, of course, for Black women this year. And perceptions of inclusion and belonging in the workplace are still painfully low. And so, what was too much? I think maybe it was the performative work that was too much, the statements, the donations, the workshops that lacked real tangible action or intention. And so, if that was overblown, maybe, but the actual results and changes in the workforce and in society as a whole is painfully low.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I mean, and certainly the data shows that. And also, like, what's the alternative to have not taken those steps? I mean, I think that there was an international dialogue that came about, and I think that there certainly is a greater understanding by a lot of folks of the concept of systemic racism, even by people who think, okay, it was overblown. I think they at least get it now. And I think that's a good thing, right? There was more certainly more dialogue about it, even if they're over it.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and that's something, 5 years ago, the average person probably still thought racism was a thing of the past, that a
Hmm.
problem had been solved for before George Floyd, and so that is something net positive, that people understand that these are real issues, whether they buy into, how to solve them and how urgent
Correct.
they are. I think that's the part that we're still struggling with.
Yeah, exactly. Because the perception that some of the solutions are unfair or reverse racism, etc. But I think
Mhm.
that we certainly have had a lot more productive conversations. And so I will take that as a net positive as well. And, I think that we have learned that all of this work is essential. It's not extra, but it's only effective when it's embedded
Mhm.
into the holistic way an organization functions.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and that's been my biggest lesson over these last few years is and I know you face the same challenges. We'll try to do workshops, strategic planning sessions, keynotes, and get all the folks from the organization involved. And the demographic that was often missing from my workshops and keynotes were senior leaders. And
Mm-hmm.
what does that say to the rest of the organization? This isn't really that important. They're not really bought in, or this is something that's for us, but not for them. And so that's a big miss that I will recognize and own as something I should have tried harder to do, is to really engage that group. Because I knew when you had them involved, engaged, participating, and practicing alongside everyone else, that the results were significantly better.
Mm-hmm.
But the people pleaser in me was like, "Oh, it's all right. They're busy." It's like
Sure.
that was just a big problem with the impact we were hoping to create.
I will say that a lot of senior leaders were there during my sessions. So
Good.
I'm grateful for that. I mean, I don't know that I would say the majority, maybe, but I can think about a lot of sessions in which I was introduced by the CHRO or someone in the C-suite, and even sessions that were hosted by an employee resource group. Sometimes it was the executive sponsor, who's in the C-suite, or a higher level who is part of the SLT who was there. So I'm grateful for that. But I Perhaps it was the exception, not the rule, unfortunately.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And yeah, there was some of that. Maybe I'm being a little hard on myself, but it felt like the thing that I really wanted for use the word embed, to embed inside
Mm,
the organization, is this has to
yeah,
be, modeled and be included at all levels, of course.
yeah.
And what often I saw were just kind of chunks of folks that didn't think it was for me. Either it was like a functional area that was more male dominated, or
Hmm.
maybe it was the front lines, or like, I'm just, making widgets. Like, this isn't for me
Right.
either. Or the senior level, in some cases where they just had a lot, very active calendar and it was hard to
Hmm.
squeeze in. And so that's the question I'm wondering about, Bernadette, going forward, is how do we make sure our work feels like it includes everyone, which seems
Mm,
ironic since the I obviously stands for that. But that's been something that I've wondered about, because of the backlash, because of some of the negative perceptions, because the acronym itself is so polarizing to even say anymore. How do we make sure people understand that this is for everyone?
mm. Well, so let's move into this week's good vibes. I will say, Julie, that part of what this newsletter is about and the show is about is showcasing all of the different functional areas that touch this topic of DEI. I mean, these stories are not just about HR. I mean, they really do touch all of the different roles that people play. So I hope that people find inspiration to embed this in their work through some of the stories in the show and in the
Yeah.
newsletter. All right, well, let's move into the first story, which comes from the U.S. Mint, which honored disability justice activist Stacey Park Milburn with a quarter, which was the first time a woman in a wheelchair shown in full with her tracheostomy tube was visible on this quarter. So, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, former president, was just a disembodied head on a dime. So this is like really showcasing the visibility and her disability.
Hmm. Yeah. I love that. I had no idea that FDR only had his face. And we know that, yeah, the wheelchair was very underscored during his presidency. It was purposely made, not visible. So, yeah, what a cool example. I learn something new every time from your newsletter.
We'll have to collect some of those quarters. I mean, it's
For sure.
great that these are going to be in circulation, and it's just, again, that level of visibility. People want to feel seen and they want to feel
Mhm.
represented.
Mhm, mhm. And disability in particular, we know is something that we shy away from, that we shush and don't want to talk about as much. So I think this is even more important that it's that pronounced and in a visible monetary way like this.
Yeah, exactly. All right, the second story comes from Thrive Red Bank in New Jersey, which is the world's first neuro inclusive apartment complex designed specifically for adults with autism. So it's a 34,000 square foot building, which will feature 32 one bedroom units plus a staff studio apartment. Thoughtful design elements include sensory friendly spaces, low voltage lighting, and automatic shut off appliances. Love this.
Yeah, I've got an autistic kiddo. So, I think people don't realize there's an 85% unemployment rate of autistic
Mm,
adults.
wow,
And given the labor
85%.
shortages we're going to confront in the next few years, like that's not sustainable, right? One in 36 births. So I just love this because when I read that, I imagined my little girl having an inclusive space that helped her with all of the sensory things, just the way she experiences the world. It shouldn't have to be so hard for her.
Hmm.
The world wasn't designed with autistic people in mind. And so this is a great example of how we can shift that.
And do you? I completely agree. And have you found that there's been the support your daughter needs at school? Is that are she getting what she needs? Do you mind if I ask?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting right now. We just moved, and so she has access to universal special needs pre-K, which is pretty amazing. I mean, I feel very privileged and fortunate to have that kind of availability and live in a community that cares about people and is willing to invest in education. Not everybody has that. So, the biggest thing is in the developmental periods. 40% of autistic people are nonverbal, and so for a kiddo, and she's verbal, but not in a comprehensible way. Like we kind of speak her language, but for other people, especially teachers, maybe not so much. So having special access to speech therapy and even the technology for it is really expensive.
Mm.
So sadly, there's a privilege baked into this, like many of our systems, but we're getting a
Oof.
lot more support. I feel very thankful.
Well, that's great. Glad there's a silver lining. You always got to find the silver lining, right? All right. The third story this week is about gig workers who are about one in four Americans, and many of those are members of traditionally marginalized groups. These are folks who are drawn to independence, but because of their gig worker status, they're left without health care, retirement, or paid leave. So DoorDash piloted a portable benefits program in Pennsylvania, contributing 4% of their earnings, gig workers' earnings, into savings accounts. So these folks used these benefits for basic needs that traditional jobs don't cover. Now, it's very cool, but only a band aid fix.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that because gig workers are a huge growing part of our economy, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
know it disproportionately affects women, people of color tend to fall into these for the flexibility and just having control over your schedule, which is necessary as caregivers, et cetera. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it sounds like a good start, right, Bernadette? Like there's more that needs to be done here. Um, we just don't know, like if companies see this as an investment, excuse me, see this as an investment that's really worthwhile. Think about retention rates, think about access to top talent. We know that with benefits, especially around flexibility, they are going to get a good bang for your buck. So hopefully more
Mm-hmm.
companies see this in our truly capitalistic society.
Yeah, I hope so. And it's just a pilot in Pennsylvania, so hopefully it will expand and it will be able to kind of round out the benefits or the experience that these workers need.
Hmm.
It's just to take care of their families. All right. The fourth story comes from the state of Vermont, where 1 in 25 children has a parent in prison. So, for 20 years, though, Camp Agape has been a refuge, a week long summer camp just for kids age 8 to 12 with incarcerated parents. This is pretty cool because it's the only place that kids don't have to hide their family story. And these children of incarcerated parents, they're among the most invisible victims of mass incarceration. They're disproportionately brown, black, and low income. Great program.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, that made me so happy. I was a kiddo, not that my parents were incarcerated, but being raised by a single mom. I remember wanting to go to summer camp like my friends did and just being like told like, heck no, we don't have money for that. And so
Right.
to see a story like this of kiddos that have access to this opportunity in the shared community of other kids that are experiencing it so they don't feel alone and they don't feel like they have to hide those stories. They can just be their full selves. Like, how cool is that? And it strikes, I think it's a systemic issue because we know if your parents are incarcerated, your likelihood of being incarcerated is much higher too. And so it
Mhm.
also could help break the cycle and help kids get access to mentors and love and support that everyone deserves.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, and of course, that's only a band aid fix as well, but it's a great program. And at least it gives these kids a place where they feel less stigmatized or they feel like they can be a little bit more authentic. All right. And the last story this week, random story. Sometimes I find these, Julie, and I'm like, what? How is this possible? Okay, so this story comes from Denmark, which just abolished its 25% sales tax on books, which is the world's highest tax on books. And they're doing that to reverse what officials call a reading crisis because only 1 in 4 Danish 15-year-olds cannot, or 1 in 4 cannot understand a simple text. Neighboring countries like Norway tax books at 0%. What?
That is wild. Well, and this is an international thing too. Reading rates are down for adults considerably, like in the teens. And social media, phones, I'm sure has a lot to do with it. So we're reading elsewhere, but I've always been a big reader, and I can't imagine having a sales tax like that. It's so
25%.
exorbitant.
Yeah.
I have some friends from Denmark and they joke, we're the happiest country, but it's expensive to live here and the winters are brutal from what
Yeah.
I've heard. But in all seriousness, yeah, reading literacy is such a big deal. Like we need to think about how to take down any perceived barriers to that, cost being one of them. And a great example of, legislation and government working in the right direction too.
Yeah, because this has now become a systemic issue that they have to solve. Because a 25% tax on books, it feels punitive, right? It feels like we're punishing you for buying books. Like it's like a cannabis tax. We're punishing you, right? And
Right.
so for the privilege of um so yeah, I mean now they're addressing this systemic issue that it was ridiculous to begin with. Unbelievable. Uh,
Truly.
all right. All right, Julie, let's move into this week's Good Vibes to Go. I'll share my Good Vibe to Go, and then I'll invite you to share your Good Vibe to Go. All right, so my Good Vibe to Go is some fresh data for you to promote your LGBTQ plus inclusion efforts. So the Human Rights Campaign Foundation reports that companies in the highest corporate equality index score quartile saw average revenue growth of 12.3% over 15 years, more than double the 5.23% growth of companies in the lowest quartile. Now, can we say definitively that there's a correlation? I don't know, but there's definitely good data to support LGBTQ inclusive policies. All right, Julie, what is your good vibe to go?
Actually, perfect timing. I just listened to Adam Grant's latest podcast episode, and he interviewed an expert from the Netherlands about moral ambition. The reason I'm mentioning this is what they've found and all the research that the author did for the book is that what drives people to be ambitious and in a good way, in a moral way, is being invited, being
Oh.
asked. So if you look at like any social movement, whether it was against the Nazis in World War II or
Mm,
here with slavery in the United States, it was somebody saying, "Hey, I need your help with this. Can you come do
mm,
this thing?" And so I think it's just a great reminder of allyship and that we need to be inviting others with a very clear, direct ask. They're
mm,
actually waiting for the invitation. What if we were the one to give them no excuses to not
mm.
join?
It's true, especially if other people in their lives just keep them safe and comfortable and don't give them such invitations or challenge them
Mhm,
in that way. So,
mhm.
yes, I love it. Great advice from Julie and Adam Grant. Awesome. Julie, how can folks get in touch with you?
Yeah, it's super easy. I'm on LinkedIn. I post most days, Julie Kratz, Kratz. And then Next Pivot Point is my website. There's free training, great resources there. And I have a weekly Forbes column as well. So you can find me any one of those places.
Awesome. And don't forget Julie's new book, We Want You, an allyship guide for people with power. Awesome, Julie. Thank you so much. You have been a great guest, a great repeat guest. Great to have you back on the show. And folks, if you don't already get the Five Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Thanks. Have a great week.